Hello and welcome to the Weekly Bread. Loaf it or hate it, this is what's been going on. Our slice of the week is a shocking one in a completely unexpected turn of events that surprised the whole world. Vladimir Putin has won the electoral race for the presidency of Russia to secure his fifth term in office, accruing 87% of the vote. The election saw the biggest turnout in Russian history, with 74% of eligible voters taking part. The runner-up was Communist Party leader Nikolai Kharitonov. The biggest opposition in the polls, however, came from Alexei Navalny, who is both ineligible to run for office and dead. Thousands of Russian voters turned up to the ballots at noon on Sunday in a protest organized by Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalnaya, against elections which U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby called obviously not free nor fair. The protests, dubbed Noon Against Putin, saw dozens of arrests made by Russian police. Russia's Interior Ministry has stated that 155 administrative charges and 61 criminal cases were filed over the course of the election. In his victory speech, Putin reassured his supporters that Western comments about the result weren't to be taken seriously. What did you want for them to applaud us? They're fighting with us in an armed conflict. Their goal is to contain our development. Of course, they're ready to say anything, he said. Meanwhile, his enemy in said armed conflict, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, rebutted by saying the Russian president is addicted to power. This imitation of elections has no legitimacy and cannot have any, Zelensky stated in an address to his nation. This person must end up in the dock in The Hague. This is what we must ensure, anyone in the world who values life and decency. Constitutional changes enacted in 2020 means Putin is eligible to run twice more once this next term comes to an end, potentially prolonging his regime until 2036, or more realistically, until he decides to retire. By the end of this term, he will have passed Joseph Stalin's 29-year record of rule in Russia. In Europe, as tourism continues to increase all over the continent, the residents who were already there have started to grow resentful towards their creators. In Malaga, the crown jewel of Spain's Costa del Sol, stickers have started popping up around the city in protest, saying things like, "This used to be my home," "Go fucking home," and "Stinks of tourist." This movement was started by local bar owner Danny Donko, explaining that his motivation comes from being kicked out of his home of over a decade as the owner refused to negotiate a contract. Why? Because he wanted to turn it into a tourist rental. Malaga's city centre has been going downhill for a long time, so much so that if, for example, something in my bar breaks, I don't have the hardware store on hand to buy anything, since the tourist who comes doesn't need screwdrivers, Dronko told Diario Sur. His view was supported by local politician Dani Perez, who wrote on Twitter that you walk the streets of Malaga and it is practically impossible to find a residential building that does not have a lockbox, accusing Mayor Paco de la Torre of not lifting a finger for the people of Malaga and expelling them from the city where they were born. Data from Spain Statistics Institute shows that 80% of new residents in Malaga recently have been foreigners, driven by an influx of digital nomads coming to work for the 630 tech companies that have opened offices in the city. This is in addition to the 14 million tourists who visited the Costa del Sol last year. Over in Africa, Somalia has had 99% of their debts relieved by creditor group Paris Club, adding up to $2 billion. The club is run by senior officials of the French Treasury, and its members include the likes of the US, UK, Russia, and Japan. They announced in a statement that the countries involved had agreed on a voluntary and bilateral basis to pardon Somalia's debt, a major boost for the country trying to recover from decades of civil conflict. Achieving full debt relief will transform Somalia's future and allow our government to create fiscal space for basic public services, Somali Finance Minister Bahir Eged posted on Twitter. Information Minister Daoud Aris echoed his thoughts, calling it a big milestone in the country's journey to financial recovery. Last December, the country became eligible for $4.5 billion of debt relief from completing the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, or HAPC, an IMF and World Bank run program to help lift nations burdened with unsustainable debt with restructuring their budget, fighting poverty, and improving transparency. Most of this debt was accumulated by former dictator Siad Barre until his regime's collapse in 1991. Economist Uwais Abdullahi Ali has stated that the waiving of all this debt is a big achievement for Somalia and allows it to begin re-engaging with credibility with international financial markets. He further recommended the extra money that won't be spent anymore on paying interest should be invested into the country's education and health. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud told The Guardian after receiving HIPC eligibility that Somalia's debt relief journey was no simple task. It took nearly a decade, 3 different administrations, 2 presidents, and 4 finance ministers to attain it. Debt relief, he's added, is just the beginning of real change in Somalia. In Asia, members of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, have been roasted by the media after leaked footage of a party event shows scantily clad women dancing on attendants' laps. Local media reported the women to be a part of the glamour dancers troupe and claimed they had been asked to grab banknotes dangling from party members' mouths with their teeth. Said members were of the LDP's youth division, attending the event in the city of Wakayama. Organizer Tetsuya Kawabata had defended the goings-on in the event, saying that it happened in a bid to improve diversity. The deputy head of the local LDP youth wing told broadcaster All Nippon News Network that we invited the dancers after studying from various viewpoints, including whether it matches the theme of diversity. He has reportedly resigned from the party since. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, a member of the LDP, called the event highly inappropriate and most regrettable, adding that it didn't match the cabinet's goal of diversity. He explained that what my cabinet seeks is an inclusive society where all people feel the meaning of life with their dignity and diversity respected. This is just the latest in a series of LDP scandals, with their approval rating currently sitting at just 18%. It also comes at a time when the party is making a bid to improve the representation of women in Japanese politics, a male-dominated affair, with them now featuring a record count of 5 women. In North America, researchers at Fisheries and Oceans Canada, in collaboration with members of the Kitasu Shayshais and Heiltsuk First Nations, have discovered a thriving coral reef in a fjord along the British Columbia coast, a place where scientists believe one shouldn't exist. The discovery was tipped off by First Nations members who for generations have noticed rockfish congregating in the fjords. When we started to see the living corals, everyone was in doubt. Cherise Dupré, head of Fisheries and Oceans Canada's Deep Sea Ecology program, shared. Then, when we saw the expansive fields of coral in front of us, everybody just let loose. There were a lot of pure human emotions. The reef, dubbed Lophelia Reef, or Kaukiwizuk by the Kitasu Shayshais and Heiltsuk First Nations, exists deep below the surface, yet presents 10 hectares of thriving corals and sponges of rich pinks, yellows and purples, The Guardian reported. The Pacific has some of the oldest water in the world, meaning it has low levels of oxygen, which makes it hard for coral to survive, Dupré explained. She also mentioned how the North Pacific is more acidic than average, a factor which causes corals' calcium carbonate structures to dissolve. The research team's prevailing theory is that the fjord's exceptionally cold water in a zone of watercolor mixing is the secret to the reef's success, as highly oxygenated water is pushed down to the coral. At first you think a reef like this must be one of a kind, but it can't be, Dupré stated. That's not how nature works, so now we're going to find the other ones that must be out there. Canada's Federal Fisheries Department has since banned all button contact fisheries from conducting activity in the area. In South America, a study by the Colombian Navy is currently underway to determine the feasibility of lifting the San Jose, an 18th century Spanish galleon found off the Caribbean coast, out of the ocean. The ship's contents include gold, silver, emeralds, worth an estimated $17 billion. Alhena Caicedo, director of the Colombian Institute of Anthropology and History, has dismissed the financial incentives for recovering the shipwreck, however. We aren't thinking about treasure, we're thinking about how to access the historical and archaeological information at the site. The San Jose was part of the Spanish Armada during the War of Spanish Succession, when it was sunk by a British squadron in 1708 off the coast of Cartagena. It's thought that the site holds much information about the state of the Spanish Empire and the world at the turn of the 18th century, including global trade networks at the time, Spain's colonial hierarchy, and the lives of those who went down with the ship. Recovery will be difficult though. The warm tropical waters of the Caribbean will have had a negative effect on the wreck's condition. The contents are really varied, and we have no idea how the remains will react when they come into contact with the oxygen, Caicedo told The Guardian. We don't even know if it is possible to raise something out of the water. The salvage mission will be under the effect of many factors, such as sea temperature, the current, and the geology of the seabed. The wreck was discovered by the Colombian Navy back in 2015, with interest being generated to retrieve it thanks to its incredible wealth of precious stones. This has, however, also caused a 9-year-long argument over who has the right to the ship. The US-based salvage company Sea Search Armada claimed they had agreed to a split in the revenues with the Colombian government, but that was shot down by a US court. The country of Spain also claims it, as it was once a part of their imperial navy, while indigenous Bolivians also claim their ancestors were the ones who mined the treasures on board in the first place. In Oceania, the new Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Feleti Teo, has asked for guarantees from Australia on respecting the island nation's sovereignty in light of a new deal between the two signed last December. The treaty outlines cooperation between Tuvalu and Australia in national security and defence-related affairs, stating that the former shall mutually agree with Australia on deals with other nations, and was signed into effect by the previous Tuvaluan administration. It also grants immigration rights to 280 Tuvaluans a year to Australia. That obviously gives the impression of Tuvalu conceding its sovereignty to decide whatever security arrangement it prefers, Teo explained, further expressing his disappointment that the deal hadn't been through public consultation before being signed. What I've asked the Australians is that if we are able to come to some arrangement that stops short of revising the treaty, that guarantees and assures that Tuvalu's sovereignty is intact, then I'm all good for it. When the treaty was negotiated, there was no consultation with the public, so the people frowned on the treaty when it came out, he continued. That's why we are mounting an educational program to socialize and explain the entirety of the treaty. A spokesperson from Australia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has stated the treaty recognizes that the statehood and sovereignty of Tuvalu will continue. The Tuvaluan government has been criticized for not including stricter emissions targets in the deal. As a nation of small, low-lying islands, the climate crisis is very close to heart, but Teo has clarified that he was already heartened by the commitments laid out by Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in their phone correspondence. This deal has broader geopolitical goals for Australia, as they compete for influence in the Pacific with China. Tuvalu remains one of the few countries in the world to continue to recognize Taiwan instead of China, and the nation's Prime Minister has assured his government's stance will not change from that of his predecessors, explaining he has far more immediate, pressing development challenges internally. Meanwhile, in Portugal, tragedy strikes as the Instagram page for Miao Maria, the Republican Assembly's cutest and most complete PR agent, has announced the cat's passing on March 1st. The feline, who has been living at the São Bento Palace for the past year, had developed a tumor in its kidneys and had a few months left to live. Since then, The three-person team that takes care of the Republican Assembly's cats has been giving him veterinary care, medication, and lots of cuddles, Meow Marie's Instagram admin stated, continuing on to say, I thought it was only fair to let you all know, also to thank you all for the care, love, and tenderness you've shared with him. He's a warrior, a fighter until the very end, and I'll assure you of one thing here on Meow's page, I'll be with him until the end. PAN representative Inês de Souza Real expressed her condolences for the cat, sharing on social media that the corridors and gardens of the Republican Assembly have become emptier. A big hug to the carers who tirelessly look after the parliamentary cat colony. Meow Maria was one of the 7 cats who live at the Republican Assembly, alongside Toto, Guidinha, Repazit, Rudi, Farushka, and Tobias, who also has an Instagram page. The building also hosts pheasants, pigeons, and 2 seagulls. In charge of their care is a 4-person team, headed by Lena Gormsh, who has worked at the Parliament's clinic for 23 years.